Arthur,
Yes,
good evening. My name is Joe
fine.
Viglione.
A million times a year, and when you want to call me, we have a trouble. Okay, go ahead. You're Joe. What?
Joe Viglione on Visual Radio.
Right.
And we talked about having an interview with your book, The Immortal Count.
Yes.
Do you have time tonight?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Here I am.
The Life and Films of Bela Lugosi. Now, I have the first edition too, Arthur, and I'm very proud to own both copies. Thank you very much for writing this book.
Thank you.
In the age of the internet, people do research online, but you actually went to Hungary to get information on Bela Lugosi.
Yes, it was kind of a joke there too, because they thought, well, why are you interested in somebody like that? And now I realize that Romania, for example, now features tours about Dracula and Come to the Land of the Vampires. But when I was there in 1970, they thought it was outlandish and stupid. Oh, obviously they saw a commercial advantage to having people want to see where Count Dracula supposedly had a castle.
On one level, on another level, this incredible artist that is so important, you have put together a book that I find absolutely fascinating. And I just think it's important for people to have this kind of information available. So, as a longtime fan, I thank you.
Oh, you know, when I wrote that, no one was interested in Bela. He had been basically forgotten. And now he's somewhat of a cult figure, more highly regarded, for example, than Karloff today or some of these other people. It's amazing that his autographs or his lobby cards are among the most expensive that you can possibly get.
And this was
What
before.
happened in the last 30 or 40 years?
This is before Ed Wood, right?
Oh, yes.
So it wasn't just that Martin Landau brought some attention to him.
I think it helped, but no, he was already, want to put it that way, good prices for his memorabilia.
And you can see it on eBay when you do a Karloff or a Lugosi. Both are very popular still, which is nice.
Yes.
I grew up.
I was criticized for supposedly saying harsh things about Karloff. I didn't intend to do that, though some people have read it that way. It's just that Karloff has always been seen as the genial, polite, responsible, and highly more successful horror man. And Bela was always, he was supposedly alcoholic, and he was a dope fiend, and all the rest of it. And so all the best sides of Karloff were mentioned. Not that he had also 5 wives and completely neglected his daughter, for example. And Bela, who's seen only in the bad light, and actually he tried very hard, as best he could, to survive. I guess the essential problem was that Karloff was famous because he was in disguise as the monster or as the mummy or something like that, whereas Bela was Dracula, and therefore the image of Dracula and Bela were synonymous, and he couldn't seem to break out of that to be somebody else but. That was the big problem. And of course he had that heavy accent, but of course so did Karloff, except I guess an English accent is more acceptable than a Hungarian one, which is very difficult, my friend.
Very good, Arthur. That's very nice. Did you know the late Ray McNally?
Me?
He wrote In Search of Dracula, In Search of Frankenstein.
Oh, yes. In fact, I met him years ago. That's right. He and Fort Tenescu or something like that.
Radu Florescu.
Yeah, that's right.
Because it's Halloween, I interviewed Ray McNally in 2002. He had written In Search of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So Ray came on my show, and we lost him maybe a year later.
I hope you're not getting a president there.
No, stop it. Stop it. You're going to be with us a long time. You're immortal, Arthur.
Yeah, immortal. Yeah,
Or immortal. But,
immoral maybe.
you know, your original book, it's fascinating to me that they didn't republish it because it sold out and it became a collector's item.
Yep.
And
Yeah, I think it was a freak thing in a way that they published it at all. I suspect that what they had, somebody had done a book on Paul Muley for Putnam.
okay.
And I think, when I think about it, that maybe they wanted to put two film figures together in their advertising, and therefore more acceptable when I sent in a letter, you're interested in a book on Dracula, on Lugosi. That may be. The editor was William Targ, who was a very nice fellow, and who I guess had got Puzo there, what's his name, with The Godfather, he had discovered him. So he was their editor. He was very pleasant.
Oh, so you worked with Mario Puzo's editor.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, William Targ, and then he left the company afterwards.
From The Godfather to The Count.
Yeah.
That's-
Well, those. It was a funny thing. I had gotten so many rejection notices whenever I tried to get the Lugosi book published. I said, the hell with it. And I had a young lady friend. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I said, what the hell, we'll send a letter off. And I said, that's not really worth the trouble. She said, oh, go ahead anyhow. So we sent it, and I got a reply, we want the book. And my letter was, look, if you don't want it, let me know within 2 days, because I can't put up with the damn suspense anymore. If you don't want it, okay. It was really a nasty letter. But they ignored that, and it went over very well, happy to say. Yeah, it's too bad they didn't do more of it. I think they printed 7,500 copies, something like that. In fact, it outsold the book that they did on Paul Muni, which did very badly. And the fellow who wrote that book, I can't remember his name, actually sued Putnam because he thought he should have gotten more money than he did.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Little sidelight to it.
I found your book at the Burlington Public Library here in Massachusetts.
Uh-huh.
Before I got the Kentucky version, the new leather-bound version.
Uh-huh.
Mine has an autograph number 69 of 182. So I thank you for that.
Welcome.
But I offered the Burlington Library $35 for your book, and they didn't want to sell it. And eventually they did sell it to me, so I do have it. The original pressing of it.
Right.
And now, the expanded version is just totally amazing. There's so much information on this very important actor. And one thing about your book, Arthur, is it got me back on YouTube watching both original Draculas, the Lugosi one from 31
Right.
and the Spanish version, which I wasn't aware of until I started reading your book. And my question to you is, in the digital age, the Spanish version does have some unique moments. When Renfield is going into the castle for the first time, the lighting is better.
Yeah.
They both have the creaky door, but do you think it would be valid to take some of the elements of one and put them into the Lugosi just to expand it a bit?
It's that can only be done in a few shots, unfortunately, because what you have is a variant treatment. Bale starts to open the coffin, the camera moves over to the window and then back, and he's standing up. In the Spanish one, smoke and fog come out of the coffin. Well, you can't have both takes.
Got it.
You have to have one or the other. I think some of the ride through the night is a little bit better before they approach the castle in the opening of the film in the Spanish version. The Spanish version, believe it or not, is about a half an hour longer. Then what happened was, I guess they saw the Dracula one, they trimmed it. They ran the Spanish one and said, no, the Dracula one is too long, and they trimmed it and did a couple of retakes, and that's what we have is the present film.
Which brings me to my next question. In all your research, did you find any evidence that Universal might have outtakes in the vaults?
No, I don't think so. They would go insane. All these studios would go insane if they had coming out with 50 films a year and they were keeping outtakes yet of them. I mean, imagine just the storage problem of all that. And no one thought there'd be any value to that. You just throw it out.
How tragic. Because as you know, the record labels, a lot of the record labels, RCA, for one, the old RCA label, was very specific about cataloging all of their artists. Elvis Presley, even the John Philip Sousa band from, I think it was 1898. They have everything very perfectly cataloged. I was hoping a film company would kind of mirror that. But alas.
Well, yeah, well, they just see, most of them thought these things were rather ephemeral. Most films had a life of maybe a year and a half, unless it was an extraordinary film, and it was forgotten. There were very few film revivals. Dracula was one, Frankenstein was one, and the horror films repeated. But a lot of the films made in 1929, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, they could never be seen again. It's only with television and Turner that we have the opportunity of seeing these films. Otherwise, it was simply impossible.
And now it's YouTube, though. You know, I don't think Lugosi ever thought he could sit down at a computer and see himself on a small screen, very small screen.
Yes. Well, I think also that Bela played his life rather badly, and I think he was lucky that he got in Dracula. In fact, he took a very small salary in order to get the job because they knew he wanted it, so they didn't give him much. I mean, David Manners and the other people made more money out of it than Bela, and Bela was the star. And he never got another penny out of Universal ever. I think he got $3,500 for 7 weeks' work. And that was all he ever got. And they made millions and millions on that film.
Oh, they certainly did, and they still do today with the DVD releases.
Yeah, I know. And they would give you nothing. In the snow in the wintertime, my mother used to say.
Now, with a lot of film falling into the public domain, many Lugosi films, White Zombie, we're doing a whole festival this month. We're actually doing it with someone you know, Frank Dell'Ostrito.
Oh, yes, yes.
Frank calls in every week, and we discuss the movies before we broadcast them. And Frank considers you the real pioneer, the guy that opened the door to get these biographies out.
Yes, he's been rather kind and appreciative of some other people who write on Bela dismiss me as having done nothing ever, and that rather hurts.
Well, you can rest assured.
But it's not true either. But you know, some of these characters think that they own Bela, and those of us who did all that other work were just doing nothing.
Oh, Frank is very complimentary to you whenever we talk about you on the show.
Frank's a very nice guy. I never met him, but I've met a lot of correspondence with him.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah, he came back. He was in Indonesia for a while.
Frank and his wife get around. They do get around. How did the new book with Kentucky Press come about? You had the Putnam release, and it was out in what, the 70s?
Yeah, and the rights reverted to me, and they weren't interested in it anymore. And some other company, I think DeCapo, wanted to reprint it, and I said, well, I would like to revise. And he said, no, you can't do that. You could write a new introduction, but I said, there are a lot of things I'd like to change. And they said no, and I said, well, no, back to you. Then I had done the Stroheim book for the Kentucky Press.
Ah.
And do you know that book?
I know of it, and I meant to bring it here today, but I'm sorry, I was negligent. Sorry, I meant to go to the library and bring it out and bring it here.
That's more than you ever wanted to know about Erich von Stroheim. Well, anyhow, I said, well, I think I'd like to redo the Baylor book, and they said, fine. And I said, because I realized that some people are paying $300 or $400 a copy for the original book. I got $1 out of it. It hurts a little bit. I felt like Baylor, I did Dracula, and Universal makes the money. So, but then I ended up spending a couple of years, revising the book, and except for some of the first chapter, almost everything has been thoroughly rewritten. If you read both books, you can see that.
And that's amazing, painstaking work, but...
Yes, it was. I bet you I went through looking at Dracula and that Spanish Dracula maybe 60 or 70 times. I know it sounds stupid, but you write something and then you think afterwards, was that scene before or after, or do I remember wrong? And then you got to go through it again because I wanted to be right. Because so many of these books, they remember things badly and they come out, with all kinds of errors. So I had to keep going through it over and over again. Be surprised how bad your memory is. What order a scene occurs.
Now, did you get the script from Universal? Because you have portions of the script here, page 109.
Not from Universal was not terribly helpful. When I first went out there, I managed to get into the files and looked at some of these things and rapidly did whatever I had to do. But then, I think, particularly after Baylor Jr. had the lawsuit against Universal, they thought it was a bad idea for anybody to go into their files because you never know when they'll find something and then they'll be sued. So that whole avenue closed up. So you couldn't go take a look at contracts or this and that, or some of the other, backstage details. One of the myths was, that the Spanish Dracula was shot at night and the other one was shot in the daytime. That's not quite true. The Spanish Dracula started a few days after the American version of it.
Oh, is that true?
Yeah. So it wasn't that they had to set up in the daytime and then he came by and shot it at night. Maybe in some cases, but it did start a little bit later.
Oh, so they actually got to see more of the Lugosi film.
Yes, I think they generally saw what Browning did and thought, well, we can do it better. Some people have liked the Spanish Dracula better now, but maybe because it was fresh, and whereas the other one we know all too well. But the camera work, the lighting is much better in Dracula than in the Spanish version, which shows that Carl Freund was a better craftsman than the fellow who did the Spanish one. But that takes a lot of viewing. I had to see one shot, and then I had to go and see the shot on of the other version, and go back and forth. It's okay to stand back and say, yeah, that's much better. It's another thing to examine it, each one, to find out where the difference is, what's good about it. So that took a lot of time, that Dracula section, much more than maybe it was worth doing, but I wanted to get it right.
No, I think for those of us who really appreciate the artistry, I think you captured it, Arthur. When someone makes an artistic work, John Lennon does a song like Instant Karma, it's very hard for the people doing the tribute records to top it because it's just so perfect. The timing and just having written the song and they go right in the studio and record it. Lugosi having been so important to Dracula, the film, no matter what the flaws of the director's flaws or whatever, if people perceive that, I don't see how any other actor could even come close to what Lugosi did. And I'm specifically talking about the Spanish version.
Right. Oh, he's terrible, isn't he?
Well, it's kind of hard to live up to Lugosi, so yeah, I think he's kind of terrible too. But in fairness to him, how does someone ever come close to a John Lennon or a Frank Sinatra?
Right.
They do the initial version, and it's kind of hard to replace.
Well, look at Charlie Sheehan there in Half Men. This other guy is. It's not the same show without Charlie Sheehan in there.
I'm not a big fan of it. I've just
Well, I've seen a few of it. I mean, there is a difference. I mean, you can't. Some of these people you just can't replace. I mean, they're gone. They're gone.
And that's so true. And it was his show, really.
Another issue that I spent a lot of time on was that they were going to use Lon Chaney if he had not died in Dracula. That's absurd for so many reasons. It's unbelievable, and yet that rumor continues. Chaney was employed from 1923 on, I believe, or 25 on, at MGM. And Universal was a crummy studio in comparison to MGM. Okay?
Okay.
Lon Chaney was making several well-budgeted films there at MGM. Are they going to let him out to work for Universal to play Dracula? And if so, what would the Dracula be? If they were going to remake Nosferatu, then Lon Chaney as a grotesque would be fine. But the studio bought the rights to the play. And the play is an urbane, sophisticated Count Dracula in English society. Now, how could Lon Chaney, who frankly looked like a truck driver, I mean, he really had a proletarian look, even pretend to be an aristocrat and could not use any makeup? Because how could you look like that and then show up in a drawing room? So, I mean, that's just a complete fabrication. But,
I'll take a wild guess to answer the question. Interview with the Vampire, one of the worst casting moves of all time, Tom Cruise. For box office potential, right?
yeah.
I just think he just didn't play the part well. And isn't that kind of like Lon Chaney of this era? The box office appeal, so put the big star in, even though he's not good for the part.
Yeah, well, I don't think that would ever happen. I don't even think he was entertaining that thought at all.
Ah.
It's what I would call back knowledge coming in, from knowing Lon Chaney and knowing Baylor. They think, well, it would have been Lon Chaney if he hadn't died. It's wrong. It's just conjecture.
Okay.
And illogical conjecture as well. But, when you want to, address an issue like that, that means you've got to do an awful lot of work to find out that, it's not just your opinion, but you can, back it up. And the same way goes, Baylor said, well, I refused the role of the Frankenstein monster. That's not really the case. He didn't like the role when it was offered to him, but he certainly took it. He never said no to, he's like the girl down the street. She never said no to anybody.
Ha.
And Baylor never refused any offer whatsoever. So it was when they switched directors there, and James Whale took over and tended to like an all-British cast, and he saw Karloff, I guess, in the commissary with that gaunt face. Karloff at that time was very, very thin, and he also had false teeth, at least in the back of his mouth. So when he took them out, his cheek sank right in and had that really gaunt look that the monster had. And Baylor had a rather round face, and by no means was gaunt looking the way Karloff was.
That's fascinating.
So that's how Baylor lost the part, and that was a tragedy for him, because Karloff parlayed that immediately into major stuff, and Baylor didn't. I think somewhat Baylor was influenced, I said already in the first book, by his experience in the repertory theater in Hungary, where you could play a major role one night and a small role the next night. But there's a pecking order in Hollywood. Once you're on top, you don't play minor roles. He never figured this out. So he'd go from a lead role, Bela Lugosi in Dracula, and then play a hairy guy in Island of Lost Souls. A small part. Karloff didn't do that. Took one lead, then he took another lead.
And you noted how Bela would go to his friends from Hungary and not network.
Right. Yeah, I think you're quite right there. He didn't know how to schmooze. Stayed with his Hungarian friends. He had a Hungarian wife, and he liked Hungarian music, Hungarian food, and he didn't mix it up. And as he said in one of those film interviews, I'm somewhat of a lone wolf. And I think it's not only a funny line; it's true. I think he was somewhat of a lone wolf.
And perhaps it was a cultural thing too, because in America, people know you have to, meet people in order to connect.
Right, and on the other hand, his fellow Hungarians certainly didn't help him any. Michael Curtiz certainly didn't say, "Hey, Bela, why don't you take a role in one of my Warner Brothers films?" Or Joseph Pasternak or some of these other people. They just ignored him. So if there was somebody said once, if you have a Hungarian friend, you don't need an enemy.
Okay.
The line I pulled in Budapest to somebody, and it went over very badly. They didn't think that was funny. But certainly his Hungarian friends didn't help. And then the other one is Bela had lavish parties, and Bela never made much money. He went bankrupt several times. In fact, 2 years after Dracula, he went bankrupt in the fall of '32, and was basically starving. And then suddenly he made the Black Cat and the Raven and a few other films, and was doing all right up until late 1935 when England decided to ban the horror film, and suddenly Hollywood stopped making horror films, and Bela lost his house and was on basically welfare in '36 and '37. So he had a tough life, and he never made much money. So there's no way he could have a lavish lifestyle, and that's more baloney. He wasn't making $10,000 a week. When he was in a movie, he was making like $1,000 a week, and that's for 3 weeks' work. You can't live a whole year and do lavish lifestyle on $3,000 a year, even in those days.
And it's so tragic because as a kid growing up and seeing these on the monster movies on television, you'd think that these big stars were big stars with millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And one would hope that they had a decent life for the hard work they did.
Well, some did better than others, but Bela was never in the top league at all. When he did the Black Cat, I just ran across this information. I think Karloff got $7,500 for playing the lead role in Black Cat. Bela was hired for 3 weeks at $1,000 a week. That's the first good money he had in over a year. So that was maybe $3,000 versus. So Karloff was at least getting twice as much.
At least a little more than that. Wow.
Yeah, and I think there was some jealousy because in The Raven, Bela had the major role, and Karloff had a minor role, and Karloff would never allow that to occur again. So when there were opportunities in other films, he held out that Bela would get always a subsidiary role. Did you ever see The Invisible Ray?
Maybe years ago. I don't recall it though.
Okay, well, the main mad scientist in that is a Hungarian.
Dr. Janos Ruk.
Yes, Janos Ruch. I love that name. The mother says, Janos, stay away from this outer world. Your domain is here, up in the mountains. So, well, what happened? They changed the roles. Karloff plays the Hungarian mad scientist, basically, and Lugosi plays a kind of Dr. Benet, a French scientist, sane. But the script was written for the roles in reverse. And this happened again in a film called Black Friday, where Baylor was supposed to again be the mad guy, and Karloff took the role, and Lugosi, they wanted to keep Lugosi in with the credits. So he plays an American, or a gangster. Now, God Almighty, Baylor as a gangster is not terribly convincing somehow.
Eric Marnet.
The film, yeah.
Wow.
So it spoiled that film, and Karloff may have had won the battle, but he won the thing, but he lost the war because that was the end of their being put together, generally speaking. Because they were a good team, would have been a good team.
Again, hindsight's 20/20, and some of these people don't think about the future. Sometimes it's hard for them to.
Well, Baylor got a small role, which was built up by the director and son of Frankenstein. And then in an interview, Baylor said, more or less, I stole the show. And in the sense he did as Igor. But that did not sit well with Mr. Karloff, that comment. I stole the film, basically. And that's when the Black Friday occurred. No way he's going to steal this film from me.
People are so sensitive.
Yeah, but here's the point. Gene Yulkai Karloff was playing pretty rough poker here, wasn't he?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I get criticized for saying, "Well, you're so partial to Baylor." I'm just looking at it and I'm thinking, this is what's going on. This guy knew how to play politics. He knew how to demand a high salary. He knew how to say, "Hey, my name is big at the box office. You better feature me," and et cetera, et cetera. That was there. I mean, he was not that major that he could dictate terms, but he certainly was in on saying more or less what he wanted to do, what he did not want to do. I mean, I think they listened. I don't think he just ordered around.
Still, those three Frankenstein movies are great, to have them all together.
Yes.
As a continuous...
Karloff doesn't look so good in Son of Frankenstein because he put on weight.
Ah.
That's why you don't have that gaunt look anymore. The first Frankenstein, he was really scary looking. That thing did look like a corpse. That is a frightening face. It really is.
It was pretty much 8 years later that they got to Son of Frankenstein.
1939.
Your love of movies is obvious, and it's great because you just like when someone really appreciates the film and the artistry of film. What do you think of Todd Browning outside of Dracula? Was he a great director or a good director?
Oh, I think he was probably good. I think he has a lot of quirky sides to him. Dracula is not a very well directed film. I think the opening is interesting, but as soon as they get mired in that stage play, I mean, the thing just kind of dies. There's long takes and a lot of dialogue.
I think you mentioned it runs like a play.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in a sense, it was. And it did not have much movement or visual excitement. Kind of a stately pace in it. It could have been a much better film, and the dream was by Baylor that someday they would do a remake and really do it right. But of course, that never happened. And although he's known as the vampire, he only really played two vampires, really, didn't he? Mark of the Vampire, and that's a phony vampire. And later on, the film they made for Columbia, The Return of the Vampire. And then when Frankenstein meets Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. He plays the vampire 4 times. Otherwise, either a mad scientist or a voodoo, master of voodoo, or some other darn thing.
In,
Spy and what?
wasn't he Dracula at all with Ed Wood? Or a vampire? Trying to look here.
Well, that last mess that he did.
Yeah.
But who knows? I mean, that was just casual footage that Wood squeezed into his film. He really is terrible. It's amazing that they made a cult out of Ed Wood.
They did because he was terrible.
Yes, yes.
There's a certain cachet to being able to make movies when you're that bad.
Yeah.
And
Baylor was, for $1,000 he appeared in the one film, and I don't think he was even paid for the last one because no contract. He just stood there outside of his house, like home movies, and then there's one scene in the cemetery, and that's all. The rest of it. I think his foot doctor there, covered his face and pretended he was Baylor in the rest of that movie.
right, the wife's doctor. Kind of like a witch doctor, the wife doctor. I was reading your book, and then suddenly on a Sunday night, maybe a week ago, Ed Wood came on the TV, and I'm like, whoa, I haven't seen this movie in years. So it was kind of cosmic, you know. I got to sit and watch it again. And, Johnny Depp did a good job, I guess, a little over the top.
Well,
but
maybe, but I think Ed Wood was over the top, wasn't he?
yes,
See him dressed up as a woman in his Angora sweater and all the rest of it. He must have been something. Well, it was close enough to the reality that I found it deeply disturbing. I mean, I was actually sobbing looking at the film. It affected me so much because it was somewhat exaggerated, but it was close enough that it provoked an emotional response in me, certainly.
I think Landau did a good job.
Break that film. Who?
Do you think Landau did a good job?
Oh, yeah. Very good.
Yeah. Now, do you teach film still?
No, I retired a few years ago.
Okay, but you did teach film.
I taught filmmaking and I taught the history of film.
And are you working on a new book?
Yes, I'm working on 2 books simultaneously. I'm finally finishing up my giant book on D.W. Griffith.
Whoa.
Which should be my, quote, masterpiece. And I'm also doing a book on how war was treated by Hollywood from 1914 up until 41. So I don't do the war years of the Second World War, but I go lead up to it. And so that's involved in a lot of political writing, what was going on in Europe, what was going on in America, and how this is reflected in films or not reflected in films, ignored. So it's actually more of a history than a film book, that I'm not examining films from an artistic point of view, but from their political, sociological aspect.
Wow.
Which I find interesting, and I've had to look at about 300 or 400 films, because you'd be surprised how many of them pertain to contemporary politics, whether it's the Seahawk or the Hunchback of Notre Dame, the '39 version. You realize that there are comments really about contemporary politics. In the '39 Hunchback of Notre Dame, for example, there's a whole scene about refugees that are fleeing and coming to Paris. Well, why is that in there? It's because the screenwriter was a refugee from Germany and came over to America and was repeating his experiences there in the Charles Lawton film in the opening part. So, I mean, it's surprising how many little things start coming in there, or how the Army was treated when we finally got a draft law in 1940, and you have buck privates with Abbott and Costello, and how was life in the Army treated? I mean, do you have the really mean sergeant, or is it kind of fun and games, or whatever it is? So that's reflecting current events too. And unless you look at it through my perspective, you wouldn't know that. You wouldn't think that there are such references that are all over the place about war.
If you
that's a turn on for me, anyhow.
do you have the publishers all lined up already?
No, I assume if nothing else, that the Kentucky Press would do it. But it'd be nice, really, to get somebody who could really promote a book instead of coming out with just 2,000 or 3,000 things. I mean, if you write for money, I would get less than half a penny. I don't write for money, but it's nice. But I realize that Sarah Palin sells, 800,000 copies of that non-written book, and I sell 2,000 copies after struggling 10 years.
Well, there's a reason for that. One of my guests...
It hurts a little, though, you got to admit.
One of my guests, and he actually, I believe, is on Da Capo, was writing those right-wing books, and they were subsidizing them. So they would, I think they go out and buy bucket loads of them.
Yeah.
And give them away. So he said now that he's writing legitimately, it's a lot harder.
Uh-huh.
That being said, if you do come through Boston, we'd love to have you in studio, Arthur, to talk about your D.W. Griffith or the War Book.
Oh, you're in Boston. I didn't know where you were coming from, so you're in Boston.
I'm 5 miles north of Boston. We're in Winchester, Mass.
I see.
A lovely studio here in Winchester, which is a beautiful town. And we have fun. I've been doing this about 15 years on this specific show, 16 years.
Okay.
And
Mary Pickford was up there in Marblehead making a movie back in 1916.
you'll have to visit.
Yeah, I think the cameraman drowned, or another film made that same year. The cameraman drowned. I guess a wave got him while he was.
It's a dangerous set of cliffs up there because it really is. It's a lovely town, Manchester and Marblehead, but it can be dangerous near the water.
Uh-huh.
But
they were shooting in the water, so that's why.
It's an honor for me to talk to you. This is a great book.
Okay.
I treasure it. I thank you for doing this at the holiday time, but I will. I'd like to stay in touch, and when your new book comes out, we'd love to chat with you again.
I hope I'll be around and alive when the new book comes out. I mean, I'm running out of time, but I'm busy every day at it. It's fun. It's a superior kind of fun. I guess all jobs are. You probably enjoy what you're doing.
I do.
Yeah, and that's what it's all about, isn't it?
It is. Well, at least you know I appreciate what you've done.
Okay.
And Frank does too.
Okay.
Thanks, Arthur. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Fantastic interview with Arthur Lennig. Thank you so much, Arthur. And it's time to call Frank. And that'll be our show for tonight. Things go quick here. I need 5 hours.